Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. It started with a question. A simple question that sent a chill down my spine. Have you ever seen one of them? That's how it always begins. In hushed tones. In the dead of night. You'll be sitting in a dimly lit room, maybe with a drink in hand, and the air will grow heavier. You won't realize it at first, but the moment someone asks that question, you know something's wrong. Something is about to change. I didn't believe them. No one ever does. The old man sitting across from me leaned in, his eyes shadowed by years of telling stories to anyone who would listen. They come when the moon is hidden, he said, voice low and rough, like gravel scraping against your skin. In the dark of night, when the street lights flicker and the world holds its breath. I shook my head, half laughing, half scared. But the words stuck with me. Like a splinter that refuses to come out. I should have walked away then. I should have forgotten the conversation, ignored the thrill of curiosity, and just gone home. But something tugged at me. Maybe it was the strange pull of that little town, its old, crooked buildings and streets that seemed to twist into places you didn't recognize. The same streets I'd walked 100 times, and yet they always felt different at night. Or maybe it was the isolation. I was new in town. Alone. A stranger who thought he knew every corner. I thought I could handle it. I didn't think much of the stories at first. They were just local legends. Old, half-baked tales meant to entertain kids or freak out drunk strangers. But then, that night happened. It wasn't the first time I'd walked these streets after dark. But that night, that was different. I felt it as soon as I stepped outside, the weight in the air. The way the darkness seemed to press against my chest, as though the shadows themselves were waiting for something to happen. I've walked these streets countless times before, each time knowing exactly where I was. But tonight, things felt wrong. The pavement beneath my boots felt foreign, as if I was stepping into someone else's dream. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No cars. No voices in the distance. The usual hum of the city had disappeared, swallowed by the thick night air. All I could hear was my own breath, heavy and uneven. Then, there was the sound. A rustle. Soft at first, like the wind stirring leaves. But it wasn't the wind. It was closer. It was behind me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned slowly, my breath coming out in sharp gasps. Nothing. No one. Just the empty street stretching out into the darkness. Just the wind, I told myself. But my mind refused to let it go. The rustling continued, growing louder, more deliberate. Something was moving, just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal. But there was something unsettling about it. The way it moved, the rhythm. It was too precise. Too purposeful. Then I smelled it. It was faint at first, a sweet, sickly odor that made my stomach churn. It reminded me of rotting fruit, but it wasn't just that. There was something chemical, something sharp mixed in with the sweetness. I looked around, but the street was empty. The buildings, their windows like hollow eyes, stared back at me, indifferent. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. I tried to push the unease down. I had to. This was nothing. Just my mind playing tricks. I kept walking. Fast, but not too fast. I didn't want to seem like I was running. But then I heard it. A footstep. Clear. Loud. Right behind me. I whipped around, my pulse racing. Nothing. But I saw it then. The shadow. It wasn't there before. Or at least, I didn't think it was. Now, it stretched across the ground, moving with a purpose. It was long, too long, as though it was pulling itself along the pavement rather than walking. My throat went dry. My hands began to shake. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was like I was frozen. A deep, gnawing fear filled my chest, choking the air from my lungs. And then it stopped. Just like that. The shadow didn't move anymore. The rustling ceased. The smell faded. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart beating in my ears, trying to make sense of what just happened. Was it real? Did I imagine it? I shook my head, trying to force myself to breathe. It's nothing, I whispered to myself. I'm just tired. But deep down, I knew something was out there. Watching. Waiting. And I had no idea how close it was. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The fear gnawed at me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside my window, every whisper of the trees made my skin prickle. I kept imagining those footsteps, the ones that had followed me in the dark. The soft shuffle of something or someone moving just behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I convinced myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Too much to drink. A brain too eager to see things that weren't there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And I wasn't alone. The next morning, I decided to take a walk again. I needed to clear my head. I told myself it was a fluke, that I had overreacted. But as I stepped outside into the morning light, that familiar unease crawled back up my spine. The town seemed quieter than usual, as though it was holding its breath. I walked the same streets, but they looked different now. The buildings, their weathered facades, looked less like quaint relics of the past and more like silent witnesses to something terrible. The streets stretched on in front of me, each turn now unfamiliar, each corner now a place of suspicion. The rustling was back. At first, I thought it was just the wind again. The trees swayed gently, their leaves brushing together. But the sound wasn't the same. It was too deliberate. Too sharp. I stopped, listening. The sound came again. Closer this time. I took a step forward, my boots tapping softly against the pavement, trying to make sense of it. I looked around, no one in sight. The street was empty, just like last night. But that didn't make sense. The footsteps were too distinct. Too human. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My breath hitched. Just your imagination, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. But my mind didn't buy it. Not this time. I quickened my pace. The sound of footsteps matched my every move. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it was right behind me, as if it were tracking my every step. And then, just as I thought I might break into a run, the sound stopped. A silence. Not a peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that suffocates you, presses on your chest, makes you feel like you're drowning in it. I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen, not daring to move. That's why I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The shadow. It was there again, just at the corner of my vision, hanging in the darkened alley to my left. At first, it was just a flicker, a quick, unnatural movement. But when I turned to face it, it was gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Nothing. I felt stupid. It was just the sun playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't go away. That same sinking feeling. The dread that lingered at the edges of my thoughts, just waiting for me to look too long, to trust my eyes too much. I continued walking, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. The further I went, the more I noticed. The things that were just out of reach, just out of sight. The way the light flickered, the way the shadows twisted unnaturally, like they were trying to reach for me. The silence pressed in harder, more suffocating. I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. Then, I saw them. The figures. They stood in the distance, at the end of the street, half hidden by the trees. At first, I thought they were people. But something wasn't right. They were too still. Too perfect. They weren't moving. Not even the slightest twitch. And then I realized one of them was staring at me. I couldn't see their face. It was hidden in the shadow of their hood, but I could feel their gaze. Cold. Unblinking. I froze. My heart began to pound in my chest. I wanted to run. To scream. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the ground. The figure's head tilted slightly, just a fraction. The movement was slow. Calculated. The rest of them didn't move. They just stood there, watching. For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, just as I thought I might be able to breathe again, the figure took a step toward me. And then another. I felt my stomach drop. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just ran. My footsteps were louder than theirs, crashing against the pavement, my breath tearing at my throat. The street seemed endless. I kept looking over my shoulder, but every time I turned, they were closer. Always closer. I didn't know how, but they were. I reached the end of the street, panting, gasping for air, my vision blurred from the panic. My mind was racing. They were too fast. Too quiet. It didn't make sense. I looked up. The figures were gone, and the street was empty again. I stood there for a long time, catching my breath, staring into the empty space where they had been just moments before. My heart was still pounding, my mind reeling. Was I seeing things? Was it all in my head? But deep down, I knew. It wasn't. Whatever it was real. And it was coming for me. The town hadn't changed. At least, not on the surface. The streets were the same, the buildings the same, the faint smell of decay lingering in the air, just as it always had. But to me, everything was different now. I couldn't go back to what it was before. Every corner, every crack in the pavement, every shadow felt alive. And in the silence, in the weight of the night, I felt like I was being watched. The figures had vanished, but the sense of something following me never left. I hadn't told anyone about what happened. Who could I tell? How could I explain that I had seen something or someone out there and that they were still out there watching, waiting? I thought about calling it quits, about packing my things and leaving the town, going somewhere else, anywhere else, where the shadows didn't feel so heavy. But something in me kept me there. Maybe it was my stubbornness, or maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. But the more I thought about it, the less I could shake the feeling that I was tangled in something far bigger than just strange late-night walks. That night, I decided to go out again. It was foolish, I knew that. But I had to. The feeling wouldn't go away until I faced it. I stepped outside, the chill of the evening air biting at my skin, the silence pressing in. The town was eerily still. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting faint, trembling halos in the night. I walked slowly, trying to steady my breath. My mind was racing, replaying the events from earlier, the shadow, the figures. What were they? Why had they followed me? What did they want? The rustling came again. It was faint at first, barely audible, but I knew it was there. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then it stopped. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. I kept walking, my heart thudding louder than my footsteps. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the street. Just like before. Staring at me from the darkness. But this time, there was something different. This time, I could see it clearer. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall. Its outline was thin, almost skeletal, draped in a dark, tattered cloak. The hood was up, obscuring most of its face, but I could see a faint glow, 2 eyes, bright and cold, staring directly at me. I froze, my body trembling. The air around me seemed to grow colder, the sound of my breath louder in my ears. The figure didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, watching me. Then, slowly, it began to walk toward me. It was deliberate, methodical. Its movements were too fluid, too unnatural to be human. As it stepped into the light, I saw something even more horrifying. The cloak wasn't just dark. It was moving, shifting, like it was alive. I stepped back, my mind screaming at me to run, to get away, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my chest tight with terror. And then it spoke. Its voice was low, a soft rasp that seemed to come from the very air itself. "You've seen us now." The words felt like ice water running down my spine. I wanted to shout, to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't move. My breath came in shallow gasps. "You can't leave now." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I knew it was right. I couldn't leave. Not until I understood what was happening. The figure stopped a few feet away from me, its cold gaze never leaving my face. The cloak seemed to ripple in the wind, and the smell, the same sickly sweet, decaying odor, washed over me once again. And then it moved again. It was fast, too fast. One moment it was in front of me, the next it was behind me, its icy breath brushing against my neck. I whirled around, heart hammering, but it was gone. Vanished. Just like that. I stood there, breathless, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My head spun, my thoughts jumbled. What were they? What did they want? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. But one thing was certain, I couldn't go home. The street was empty. The town was quiet. But the shadows were watching. I moved quickly now, my feet carrying me down the familiar streets, but even the comfort of knowing these roads couldn't calm the fear gnawing at my insides. My mind raced with thoughts of the figure, the cloak, the eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. I reached my apartment, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel alone. The windows, those windows that had once seemed so normal, so part of the everyday, now seemed like eyes watching me. And every time I glanced at them, I saw a flicker of movement. A shadow. A face. But when I looked again, there was nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just the fear, the lack of sleep, playing tricks on me. But it was more than that. I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. I was being hunted. I walked into my apartment, locking the door behind me, and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. The room felt too small. The walls were closing in. Then I heard it. A tap. A soft, almost inaudible tap against the window. I didn't move. I didn't want to look. But I had to. I walked slowly toward the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I peered through the blinds. There was no one out there. But that didn't matter. The face was already there. In the reflection. I didn't recognize the face. It was pale, with hollow eyes, its features sharp and unnatural. But I knew that face. I had seen it before. And it was smiling. I backed away from the window, my heart racing, my pulse thumping in my ears. The room spun, and I felt like I was suffocating. The figure wasn't just out there. It was in here with me. I couldn't shake the image of that face. It haunted me long after I backed away from the window. A pale, twisted reflection in the glass, its smile wide and cruel. I kept blinking, hoping the image would disappear, but it lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. After all, the shadows play tricks on you when you're scared, don't they? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew that whatever this thing was, it wasn't a trick of the light or a moment of fear-induced madness. It was real. And it had found me. I sat on the couch, my hands trembling as I held my phone. I didn't want to make a call. I didn't want to tell anyone about this, not yet. They'd think I was crazy. They'd tell me it was just the stress or the isolation. But I knew it was more. I felt it. Something was closing in on me. I had to do something. I didn't know what. I didn't know how to fight back against something I couldn't even fully understand. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in the apartment, not with those faces in the window and the feeling of being watched that never seemed to leave. I had to go out again. The night air was heavy when I stepped outside. The streets felt different, like they were bending, warping in ways they shouldn't. The ground beneath my feet felt soft, like the pavement itself was shifting, holding its breath as I walked. I kept glancing over my shoulder, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The feeling of being watched was more intense now, like the shadows had gained weight, pressing in on me from every side. I reached the same street where I'd seen the figures before. The same cold emptiness hung in the air, the same faint rustling in the distance. But now, it was louder, clearer. It wasn't just the wind or the trees. It was something moving. Something close. I took another step forward, my footfall echoing loudly against the silent night. Tap. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the street, not from the trees. It came from above. I looked up. There, just a few feet from the roofline, was a figure. Its silhouette was barely visible against the dark sky, but I could see it. Its body was hunched, too tall, too wrong. It was perched there, staring down at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away. The figure didn't move. It just watched. And then I heard another sound. This time, it was coming from behind me. Tap. Tap. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. There, just beyond the lamplight, a figure was emerging from the shadows. It was tall, dressed in a dark cloak, but this time it wasn't alone. I could see others, 4, 5, just standing there in the street, unmoving, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the ground. The figures were silent, their presence suffocating the air. But their eyes, they were the worst part. They were too wide, too empty, like they were looking right through me. Then one of them stepped forward, its body bending unnaturally as it approached. It moved too quickly, its feet making no sound against the ground. And when it spoke, the voice came not from its mouth, but from everywhere at once, a low, mocking whisper that seemed to crawl into my bones. You can't escape. You're already part of us. The words twisted in my mind, echoing over and over. I felt like my skin was crawling, like I was no longer in control of my own body. My mind screamed to run, to get away, but my feet wouldn't listen. The shadows seemed to rise up from the ground, surrounding me, pressing in from every side. We see you. The voice came again, colder this time, harsher. I turned my head, trying to catch a glimpse of the figure's face, but it was hidden, swallowed by the cloak. I could see only the hollow eyes staring at me, unblinking. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing, it wasn't going to let me leave. My breath was shallow, my chest tight with fear. I tried to back away, but every step I took felt like I was walking through thick mud. My vision blurred, the shadows twisting, swirling around me. The street, once so familiar, felt alien now. It was as if the whole world had become a maze, and the figures were its walls, closing in tighter with each passing second. The figure in front of me raised its hand slowly, its fingers too long, too thin. The movement was slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. You're here now. The words sent a chill through me, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. Just a flash, a brief glimpse. The face beneath the hood, pale, sunken, too familiar. It was me. It didn't make sense. How could it be me? But the reflection in the figure's eyes, no, it was more than that. It was like I was staring into my own soul, twisted, corrupted. I took a deep breath and did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, my feet pounding against the pavement, my heart in my throat. I could feel the air growing colder, the shadows crawling toward me, reaching for me. Tap. Tap. The sound was everywhere now, growing louder with each step I took. It was all around me, beneath me, above me. I glanced back for just a second, and I saw them. The figures were there, in the street, standing tall, their faces hidden in the dark. They weren't chasing me. Not yet. But I could feel their eyes on me, watching. I couldn't keep running forever. I knew that. But for now, it was all I could do. I turned the corner, nearly colliding with a lamppost as I tried to make sense of everything, to understand what was happening. The figures, the faces in the window, the voices, they were all connected, all part of something that was closing in on me, piece by piece. I had to find out what it was. I had to understand what was happening to me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Whatever it was too late. I was already a part of it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, the shadows crept closer. Every flicker of light outside my window felt like a warning. A sign that they were out there, waiting, watching. I couldn't escape them. The figures hadn't followed me. Not directly. But I could feel them, like a persistent presence, lurking just beyond my vision. In every passing car, in every fleeting shadow. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if something far worse was happening. I needed answers, and I knew where to find them. The old library. That's where it started. I had been there once before, back when I was a kid. It always felt like a place full of secrets, full of forgotten things. It had been abandoned for years, but I remembered the stories. Old rumors whispered in the streets. The people who used to live here, the ones who'd been around long enough to know everything about the town's history. The legends. The ones that didn't make it into the official records. Maybe they knew. Maybe they understood what was happening to me. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to find the truth. The air felt thick with tension as I approached the library. The building loomed over me, ancient and decaying, its windows cracked and covered in grime. It had always been a strange place, even when it was open. But now, as I stood before it, it felt more like a tomb than a place of knowledge. I pushed the door open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. The smell of mildew and dust filled my nose. The faintest trace of something else, something worse, hung in the air, but I couldn't place it. It was like the scent of death, of things long buried. I stepped inside. The silence was suffocating. The only sound was my footsteps as I walked deeper into the library, past rows of forgotten books, all gathering dust. I wasn't looking for any particular book. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But I had to start somewhere. I reached the back of the library, where the old archives were kept. There was a shelf, tucked away in the corner, filled with faded papers and yellowed pages. Most of it was irrelevant. Most of it was mundane. But there, at the very bottom, there was a journal. It was worn, the leather cover cracked with age. The pages inside were fragile, but legible. It was a journal of someone who had been here long before I had, someone who had lived in this town and seen the things I was now experiencing. I opened the journal carefully, my fingers trembling. The first entry was dated nearly a century ago. They come when the darkness falls. They come with the night, when the streets are empty and the silence is thick with whispers. They are not of this world. They are shadows, faces hidden beneath cloaks, but their eyes are what give them away. They stare at you, watching, waiting. And when they speak, you can feel it in your bones. You are one of them. You belong to them. There is no escape. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I read on. We thought we could hide from them. We thought we could leave, but they are always there. Always watching. It is said that the only way to survive is to join them. To become one of them. But even then, you are never free. They take something from you, something you can never get back. I felt my heart race as I flipped through more pages. The entries grew more frantic. The handwriting was shaky, as if the person who wrote them was losing their mind. It is not just the faces. It is the things in the dark. The things that watch you when you close your eyes, when you think you are alone. They will come for you. They will come for everyone. And once they find you, they will never let you go. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages faster, desperate for answers. The journal had to explain it. It had to. But then I stopped. I reached the last entry. It was scribbled hastily, almost as if the person had been interrupted. I have seen them. I have seen their faces. I have become one of them. They are inside me now. I can hear them calling to me. I hear their whispers every night. I am them. The page ended there, torn and incomplete. It was clear that whoever had written this had vanished. Disappeared. Just like the others. The journal dropped from my hands as I stumbled backward. My mind was reeling. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the truth was more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. The figures. The eyes. The whispers. They weren't just following me, they were inside me, too. I had become part of whatever this was, whether I wanted to or not. The journal confirmed it. Once you saw them, once you knew they were real, there was no turning back. I could feel it then. The cold, creeping sensation that had been following me all this time. It was stronger now. More real. I was being watched, not from the outside, but from within. I turned quickly, looking around the empty library. The shadows had grown longer, more oppressive. They were in the corners, creeping along the walls. They were everywhere, suffocating me, pressing in from all sides. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, like a breeze. You are one of us. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the walls, from the air itself. It was everywhere. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to think. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stumbled through the dark corridors of the library, my breath ragged and shallow. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out. But when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. I slammed against it, pulling at the handle, but it was stuck. It was as if the very walls were holding me inside. I could feel them, they pressing in around me. Watching. Waiting. I turned around, and there, standing in the doorway, was one of them. The figure. The one with the glowing eyes. But this time, there were no others. No cloaks. No shadows. Just the figure, standing tall and still. You've seen too much. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, tight with terror. I couldn't find the words. The figure took a step forward, its long, unnatural fingers reaching for me. And as it did, I realized the truth. It wasn't just following me. It was becoming me. I was no longer just a witness. I was one of them. The last thing I remember was the cold of its touch, the darkness closing in, and the whispered voices, louder now, in my mind, in my blood. You are one of us. What would you do if you knew what was coming, but had no way to stop it? That was the question that haunted me even before the accident. It wasn't like I ever asked for an answer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that my life had already been written out for me, and I was just waiting for the pages to turn. Maybe I was being paranoid. Or maybe I had seen too many crime thrillers. But I couldn't ignore the sense of dread that gnawed at the pit of my stomach every time I stepped outside. That night, everything changed. It was just like any other evening. The kind of evening where you don't think anything out of the ordinary is going to happen. It was raining, but it wasn't a downpour, just enough to make the roads slick, to blur the streetlights. I was on my way home from work, half listening to the radio and trying to shake off the day. Everything felt normal. Almost too normal. That's the kind of thing that makes you feel uneasy, you know? The quiet. The way the world seems to hold its breath before something big happens. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it. A flash of movement in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the rain or the lights. But then it came again, closer. A figure, barely visible, moving quickly along the side of the road. I slammed my foot on the brake, heart racing. It wasn't a person. Not like any person I'd ever seen. The shape was wrong, its movements jerky, unnatural. I had no time to react. The next thing I knew, I was spinning. The car lost control, the tires screeching as it veered off the road. My body slammed against the seatbelt. I saw a flash of light, a blinding light, and then nothing. When I woke up, everything was dark. The first thing I noticed was the ringing in my ears, sharp and incessant. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted like metal. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. I blinked several times, trying to clear my vision, but all I could see was the blurry outline of the car's interior. The sound of rain against the windows was deafening, but it wasn't the rain that had me frozen. It was the feeling, the cold weight of something else, something unseen, pressing in from the outside. I turned my head slowly, my mind struggling to process what had happened, what had changed. My heart skipped a beat when I noticed something. The air around me was thick with an eerie stillness. There were no other cars on the road, no distant voices, no sounds of life. I had no idea where I was. The next few moments were a blur of disorientation. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. I reached for the door handle and nearly screamed when I saw it, an old, cracked message on the car's dashboard. Get out. I couldn't understand. The words were clear, but they didn't make any sense. I wiped my face with shaking hands and opened the door. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. But the moment I stepped out, the overwhelming silence pressed in around me, heavier than the rain. I looked around. No one. Nothing. The streets were empty. The buildings around me stood silent, like silent witnesses to some forgotten crime. My breath came out in shallow gasps. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder and the constant pattering of the rain. I wasn't alone. A voice. Soft, almost drowned out by the rain, but clear enough to make my skin crawl. It came from behind me. You shouldn't have looked. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was no one there. The voice, was it real? Or was it my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't wait long to find out. I had to get out of there. My legs felt unsteady, but I stumbled toward the street, desperate for any sign of life. But as I moved, I began to notice things, small things, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my blood run cold. The rain had stopped. The streets were different. Familiar, but distorted. The buildings had a strange tilt to them. The lamplights seemed to flicker erratically, casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally. And the air, it was thicker now, as if something was suffocating the world around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a sharp vibration that made me jump. I pulled it out quickly, hoping for a signal. But there was nothing. No service. Just the screen, glowing faintly. And then, another message popped up. It's too late. They're already here. I felt a chill run down my spine. The words seemed so real. So final. But they didn't make sense. Who was sending them? What was happening? My hands were shaking as I swiped to check the sender. But the screen didn't show a name. Just a number. A long, unrecognizable string of digits. I looked around again. Nothing. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I had to leave. I had to get away from this place, from whatever was going on. I turned back, heading toward the only street that seemed familiar, the one that led toward my apartment. But the further I walked, the more something felt off. Something was wrong. The street seemed to stretch endlessly, like a never-ending tunnel. And the rain. The rain wasn't just falling anymore. It was dripping from the sky, like the very world was bleeding. I stumbled, my head spinning, my vision blurred. And then another message. You're not going to make it. My heart stopped. The voice in my head, the one that had whispered before, was back. But this time, it wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me from all sides. Something was coming. The darkness around me grew deeper, colder. I didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing for sure. I was trapped. I ran. There was no other option. My legs moved on their own, my body was acting on instinct, and my mind was a whirlwind of confusion. The words on the screen, the messages, they were like chains wrapped around my thoughts. The chill in the air pressed closer, as if something unseen was watching me, waiting. Every step I took felt heavier, the silence growing more oppressive with each breath I drew. The rain, which had stopped falling, now hung in the air, a thick mist that seemed to freeze the world around me. The streets I once knew, the landmarks that had guided me home countless times, were all distorted. The buildings around me stretched in unnatural angles, their windows black voids. The street lamps that had once provided comfort with their soft glow now flickered erratically, casting long, jagged shadows. It was as if the world had been turned inside out, and I was the only one left in it. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. Another message. Keep running. They know where you are. My breath caught in my throat. The coldness of the message sank deep into my chest, like a knife twisting through my ribs. The sender was still just a string of unfamiliar digits. The same number. No name. No explanation. The thought of stopping, of looking around, was enough to freeze me in place. But the feeling of being watched, of something, someone, just behind me, kept my feet moving. I pushed myself harder, faster, my heart racing in time with my steps. It wasn't just my own fear that kept me going, it was the fear of whatever was out there, hidden just beyond the reach of my sight. I turned a corner, hoping to find something, anything, that could give me a sense of direction. I didn't recognize the street. There were no signs, No familiar landmarks. Just rows of buildings that seemed to close in on me, the windows watching, waiting. I could almost hear the hum of something, low and constant, like an unseen presence, vibrating through the ground beneath me. And then, there was the sound. A creaking, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something dragging across concrete. It was faint at first, distant, but it grew louder with each passing second. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized it was getting closer. I didn't dare look back, but every fiber of my being screamed that I should, that I had to know what was following me. The dragging sound turned into a rhythmic thud, like the footsteps of something large and slow. It wasn't human. I could feel it even without seeing it. My legs moved faster, but my mind was losing control. Fear had gripped me, and I was beginning to panic. Another message. Look at your reflection. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But the words haunted me. Look at your reflection. What did that mean? I had no idea, but the message felt more like a command than a suggestion. My phone buzzed again, this time with a sudden urgency. Hurry. The urgency was palpable, and I realized that I was running out of time. The thudding was getting closer. The sound reverberated in my ears, louder now, almost drowning out everything else. I had to find somewhere, anywhere, to hide, to figure out what was going on, to make sense of this madness. I spotted a narrow alley up ahead, a dimly lit path between two tall buildings. It wasn't much, but it was my only option. I veered off the main road and sprinted toward it, my breath coming in sharp gasps, my legs aching with the strain. The sound of the footsteps followed, but they didn't seem to be getting any closer. I reached the alley and pressed myself against the brick wall, trying to steady my breath. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long in the dim light, and the air felt thick, like the very atmosphere was choking me. I turned and looked down the narrow passage, hoping for some sign that I was safe. But the alley seemed to twist endlessly, vanishing into darkness that felt far too thick, too alive. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something. A flicker of movement. I jerked my head to the side, my heart leaping into my throat. The faintest reflection, a distorted figure, impossibly tall, with a face that seemed to melt and shift. My stomach churned. It wasn't a human reflection. It was wrong. Everything about it screamed unnatural, as if something had used my own fear to take shape, to mock me. Another message appeared on my phone. It's not your reflection. Not really. I couldn't process the words fast enough. My hands were trembling, holding the phone like it might shatter at any moment. And then, just as I thought the worst was over, something new happened. The thudding stopped. For a moment, there was complete silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. But that wasn't all. I could feel it. It was here. The presence was so overwhelming that I thought I might suffocate. I turned, trying to find the source, but there was nothing behind me. Only the dark, empty alley, stretching farther than I could see. But then, the shadows moved. A figure stepped out of the darkness, not quite human, not quite anything else. Its form shifted with every step, as if it was still trying to decide what shape it should take. The air grew colder as it approached, its presence almost suffocating. The reflections around me, on the puddles in the alley, the glass of the nearby windows, flickered in time with its movements. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the sensation of its presence was undeniable. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then, in the coldest voice I'd ever heard, it spoke. You shouldn't have looked. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My heart pounded, a primal instinct urging me to run. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped by whatever force was controlling this world, this nightmare. Another message flashed on my screen. It's too late. And that was when I realized. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. I was frozen. My eyes locked on the thing standing before me. It was barely a shape, something between shadow and nightmare, its form flickering in and out of focus. The longer I looked, the less it seemed to belong to this world. There was no defining feature, no clear outline, just a grotesque suggestion of movement, a twisting distortion of light and dark. I should have screamed. I should have run. But my body refused to cooperate. The words, "You shouldn't have looked," echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else, pushing out all thought but fear. My legs trembled beneath me, but they wouldn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, but it was like a distant sound, muffled by the suffocating pressure in the air. It stepped closer. Its movements were slow, deliberate. The shadows it cast stretched unnaturally long, as if they were reaching for me, pulling me into its world. The sound of its steps was hollow, a slow, rhythmic thud that seemed to reverberate through my bones. It's not real. It can't be real, I told myself, but the words had no power. The air around me felt thick, almost viscous. The temperature dropped with every step it took, until my breath came out in a visible cloud. The figure was now only a few feet away, and I could feel the weight of its presence pressing against me, suffocating me. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stopped. The shadow hovered before me, its distorted shape flickering, twisting. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, it seemed almost still. Like it was waiting for me to do something. To move. Run. The command was louder than any thought I had. I didn't know where the voice came from, but it was clear. Urgent. Commanding. My mind screamed at me to follow it, to flee. The sensation of being watched, hunted, became unbearable. Something inside me snapped. I turned, my legs shaking with the effort, and stumbled forward into the alley, toward the only path I could see. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the air felt colder with every step I took. I couldn't stop. The thing, whatever it was behind me. I could feel it. Its presence was like a heavy shadow, hanging just out of sight. But I could feel it, pressing against my back, always just a breath away. As I ran, the world around me began to warp. The alley stretched out before me, twisting and contorting like it was alive, like it was trying to trap me. The familiar sounds of the city, distant car engines, the hum of streetlights, were gone. All that remained was the sound of my footsteps and the soft, eerie whisper of the thing moving behind me. It was getting closer. I could hear it now, not just its footsteps, but the scraping sound, like something dragging across the ground, something heavy, something. My phone buzzed again. My heart skipped a beat. Turn around. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. I knew I had to keep running, but the words, "turn around," echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else. The thing, whatever it was too close. I had to know. I had to see it. I twisted around, my feet still moving. And there it was. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. The figure stood at the far end of the alley, its form more defined now, more solid. I could see its shape, tall, thin, and impossibly long. Its limbs were stretched out in unnatural angles, the joints bending in ways that weren't possible. Its face, if it could be called a face, was an open void, dark and empty, the edges flickering like the static on an old TV. It had no eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just darkness. The air around it twisted, like the very atmosphere was bending under its weight. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across its form, making it seem to shift and change with every blink. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. The figure began to move toward me, its slow, deliberate steps bringing it closer and closer. The scraping sound grew louder, sharper, more pronounced. My breath caught in my throat, panic surging through my veins. "What do you want?" I thought, my mind racing for any explanation, anything to make sense of this nightmare. But there was no answer. The thing didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence was its own answer. I turned and ran again, this time with everything I had. I pushed myself harder than before, my legs aching, my body protesting. The world blurred around me, the street lights a mess of flickering yellow. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, had to outrun whatever it was that was chasing me. But the moment I glanced back, I saw it. It wasn't far behind me anymore. It was right there, only a few steps away, its distorted form creeping along the wall, its limbs stretching unnaturally long. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble with its presence, the sound of its movement reverberating through the alley. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape. And that's when I felt it. The first touch. It wasn't physical. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but it was there. A cold, suffocating pressure against my chest, as if something invisible was pressing on me from all sides, crushing me. The sensation was like being suffocated by the air itself. My vision blurred as the pressure increased, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. I felt my legs give out, my body crumpling to the ground. "Don't fight it." The voice was like a whisper, but it felt like it was inside my head, crawling through my thoughts. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The thing was here, and it was inside me, its presence like a weight pressing down on everything I was. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the void of its face, looming over me. And then, nothing. I woke up gasping, my chest heaving with the force of the air that seemed to be pushing its way into my lungs. The world around me was dark, almost suffocating. The cold was unbearable. The ground beneath me felt like concrete, rough and uneven against my skin. My head spun as I struggled to sit up, blinking against the sudden onslaught of light that seemed to pierce through the blackness. But I was no longer in the alley. I was somewhere else. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a damp, musty odor, like old wood and mold. It was cloying, filling my nose and throat. The air tasted thick, like something was wrong with it. My mind couldn't process what was happening. I had been running. I had been caught. That thing had touched me. The thought alone made my stomach churn. I tried to push myself up, but my body felt like lead. My arms ached, my muscles sore from the frantic running, but there was something else now. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, the edges of my thoughts slipping away. Was this real? Was I still in the alley? I couldn't tell. Slowly, I managed to stand, my legs wobbling beneath me. The walls around me were closing in, but I couldn't see them clearly. The room, or whatever this place was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Its light swung back and forth, casting long, erratic shadows that seemed to shift whenever I tried to focus on them. I turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of my surroundings, but nothing made sense. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the faded floral patterns barely visible beneath layers of grime. There was no door, no window, just the same oppressive darkness, the same stale air, and the silence. The kind of silence that felt unnatural. It was suffocating, pressing against my ears, making my head pound with every breath I took. But there was something more. I could feel it. Something moving in the corners of the room, just out of my sight. Something watching me. I wasn't alone. I tried to speak, but my voice felt weak, thin, like it was barely there. Hello? The word barely left my lips, as though the air was swallowing it up before it could reach the far corners of the room. No response. My heart thudded in my chest, a cold shiver running down my spine. I knew something was wrong. I knew it. It was that same sense of being hunted, of being watched from the shadows. It was suffocating. And the worst part was that I couldn't even understand how it was happening. Where was I? How had I gotten here? I took a few cautious steps, my feet dragging along the dusty floor. The shadows seemed to stretch with me, following every movement I made. The sound of my shoes dragging was muffled, as though the very air was absorbing the noise. And then I heard it. A soft whisper. Too soft at first to be sure, but it was there. Just beneath the silence, a voice, no, a presence. It wasn't coming from anywhere in particular, but it was all around me. The words were impossible to make out, but the tone, it was unmistakable. Cold. Detached. You're not supposed to be here. The voice wasn't human. It didn't sound like a person, not in any way that I could understand. The words felt like they were wrapped in something alien, something other. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my throat felt dry, like there was no air in my lungs. I turned again, this time faster, desperately searching for any way out, any way to escape. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. The figure in the alley, the cold pressure that had crushed my chest, the voice, it was all connected. But how? You shouldn't have seen it, the voice whispered again, louder this time, but still, distant. It felt inside me. It felt like it was crawling beneath my skin, reaching for something deep inside my soul. I staggered back, my breath coming faster. I had to get out of here. I had to. But there was no door, no window, nothing to escape through. I was trapped. Trapped in this suffocating darkness. You were never meant to see it, the voice repeated, as if the words were sinking in, embedding themselves into my mind. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a threat. I felt a sudden pressure on my chest, like hands were pressing down on me from all sides. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the air becoming thicker, colder. The shadows grew, stretching out until they were alive, crawling toward me. I could feel their weight, their pull, like something was dragging me into the dark. I fought against it, pushing myself forward, but I couldn't move. My legs were heavy, my body unresponsive. Every step I took felt like I was sinking deeper into the ground. The voice was everywhere now, ringing in my ears, whispering the same words over and over. You were never meant to see it. You were never meant to see it. You were never meant to see it. And then, there it was. A figure, standing in the corner of the room. The same figure. That same thing from the alley. It was closer now. Closer than it had ever been. It stood still, its form shifting and flickering in the dim light, like a mirage, a twisted shadow. But I could feel it. I could feel its presence. The coldness of it. The suffocating pressure. I wasn't supposed to see it. But I had. And now it was here. I froze. The figure, that thing from the alley, was in front of me now. No, not in front, it was everywhere. The air around me seemed to ripple, bending with its presence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The shadows swallowed the room whole, making it feel like there was no escape, no way out. And in the center of it all, the thing loomed. It wasn't fully formed. It never was. A distorted silhouette, flickering in and out like a broken signal on an old TV screen. Its outline constantly shifted, impossibly contorting, and yet there was something unnervingly familiar about it. The figure was too tall, too thin, its arms reaching out like spider legs, impossibly long and thin. Its face was nothing more than a blur of shadow and light, but I could feel its eyes. They were there, watching me. I tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My chest felt tight, like something was choking the breath right out of me. I could only stand there, paralyzed, staring at the creature that wasn't even real. But it was. It was real. The thing in front of me began to shift. The air around it distorted, bending with unnatural force. The edges of its figure wavered, flickering, as if reality itself couldn't decide what to make of it. It was alive, and it was aware of me. It knew I could see it. It wanted me to see it. I took a trembling step back, my feet stumbling over the cold floor. I wasn't sure what I was doing anymore. My brain felt fogged, like I couldn't think straight. The room around me seemed to stretch on forever, no beginning, no end. It was all one endless void, with no escape, no way out, and that thing was everywhere. Then, the voice. That terrible, twisted voice that had been whispering was suddenly sharp, clear, right in my head. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. You shouldn't have seen it. You shouldn't have known. The voice wasn't talking anymore. It was just inside me. My heart hammered in my chest as the words drilled into my mind, reverberating in my skull. I wanted to block it out, to drown it in something, anything, but the words pulsed through my body, thrumming like a second heartbeat, like a constant hum beneath my skin. You weren't supposed to know about the darkness. I couldn't take it. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, my hands gripping the floor, trying to steady myself, but the shadows were closing in. The thing, it was coming closer, crawling through the very fabric of the room. I could feel its presence creeping up on me, sinking deeper into my bones. My mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be. What did it want from me? Why was I the one it chose? Then, a terrible realization hit me like a blow to the stomach. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was happening because of me. Because of what I had done. Because of how I had seen it. I had triggered something. Something old. Something ancient. I wasn't supposed to witness this. No one was. But I had, and now I was trapped in its web. There was no escape. The thing was getting closer. I could feel it. The temperature in the room had dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. My fingers went numb as they clutched the floor beneath me. My mind swirled in confusion, trying to comprehend everything at once. But it was too much. Too much. What did it want from me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for mercy, but there was nothing left in me. My voice had been stolen, replaced by that voice in my head. The one that felt like it was coming from everywhere. The one that was the darkness. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light. A small, flickering light. It was coming from my phone? I didn't know how it had gotten there, but there it was, glowing faintly in the darkness. I reached out, trembling, and picked it up, almost afraid to touch it. The screen flashed to life as soon as my fingers grazed it, casting an eerie glow on my face. Another message. I was too shaken to think properly, but the message was there, waiting. It was a simple line of text, no fancy words, no punctuation. Just 3 words. It's too late. A chill ran down my spine. I dropped the phone in horror, the screen crackling with static before going black. The room seemed to stretch further, the shadows deepening, swallowing the light. The air thickened, and I could feel it. The thing was getting closer. It reached out. I saw its fingers, thin and elongated, like spider legs, stretching toward me. And I realized with growing terror that it wasn't just touching the air around me. It was touching my mind, my very soul, trying to drag me in. No. No, I couldn't let it. And then it spoke again. This time, I could hear it clearly, as if the words were coming from inside my own skull. You were never meant to see it, but you did. The voice was impossibly cold, distant, and yet it felt familiar. I couldn't explain it, but it was. And just like that, I knew. I knew that this wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about what I had seen. This was about something much bigger. Something ancient, something beyond understanding. It wasn't just after me. It was after everything. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.